Good morning. Has everybody had a chance to eat their tacos? This morning, we're going to be talking this morning about our transitions and how that works through conversations. And I think you all from the 8 o'clock service are hello in the kitchen.
The Lord be with you.
Those of you all from the 8 o'clock service, you get to have conversation. From what I see pretty regularly, you have conversation before service, you have conversation after service, you keep up with each other. Well, managing transitions has a lot to do with having conversation. And you are the third church I've been the interim rector at here in Austin. And I was at St. John's and COVID kind of hit on the tail end of that. We were already waiting for a new rector to come. We knew what was going on. But when I got to St. George's, it was 4 months before I met the senior warden in person. We were just in Zoom world for everything. So, and he's a wonderful senior warden. He's still hanging in, and they've got a new rector coming September 1st. But when you don't have easy access to conversation, and Zoom was okay, but we all know it got pretty old. And as I've mentioned, the only thing I really like about Zoom is it puts people's names at the bottom of the little box. But, you know, especially for kids, it got to the point where, you know, one more thing, oh, have the youth group do this. Well, no, everybody is just zoomed out. So I don't know to what degree we can count that as being conversation, but, you know, our gospel this morning was all about conversations, and conversations where people weren't paying attention that maybe should have, or vice versa. I think we can all give examples of conversations where somebody's going through the motions, but they're not really listening to you. And later on you say, well, I told you that. Well, yeah, but the person wasn't paying attention. They didn't hear. So we can listen and we can hear. And I think this is very critical when you're in a period of transition. Let me show you all something. Remember these? This is not an Easter egg. This is something else. What came in these? Silly putty, yes. Yeah, silly putty is great stuff because it can do all kinds of things, especially on Sundays. Because what was special on Sundays that you could do with silly putty? That's right, on the comics. You get it all nice and flat, and then you pound it down on the comics and peel it off, and there's the image. What else does silly putty do if you kind of forget about it and leave it sitting somewhere? It just sprawls all over. As a kid, did you ever forget and leave it on carpeting? It makes a horrible mess. I will attest to that. And
It's not as bad as play.
no.
It's in your shoe, I'll tell you that.
Remember how silly putty can snap? Or it can just, you know, do one of these things like, you know, it just stretches all out. That's a mess. I see interim time as when the putty's out of the egg. And, you know, we're doing all kinds of things. We're copying other things. We're snapping. You know, we're going around going, oh, well, I'm in charge of this too right now. You know, it's just, we go all over. So I found that this is a really good example, kind of what interim time is like for us sometimes. We have confidence. We know we're going to get through it. The church has been through it before. It's going to get through it again. It just becomes, I know, sometimes a little like we've got to get through this stage. I was up in my gorgeous office this morning. I thought, this is nice. This is probably the only thing in my life right now that is relatively organized because I'm moving this month. And I'm moving just 20 houses away. So, that's horrible because you think, oh, I'll just keep throwing stuff in the car. And you feel guilty if you don't haul something every time you go by. But that's kind of where we are right now. St. Luke's, you're right here and you're going to have a new rector at some point in time in the future. What would be your guesses of when that might be? How long were you all before Justin got here? When you think back to that, what was the biggest challenge for you, for your church community, being in an interim time period?
The change in our demographics.
Change in demographics, wow, okay. Any other thoughts?
Can you say more about that? Well, but we started out as basically a church where like there were a lot of military. Yeah, very, very long time ago, beginning. Well, that has slowly transitioned to where we've got sort of a more mixed demographic. We're not a church of old people, all that kind of stuff. So that's why we all sit here.
What would you say, though, in transitioning, though, has been that challenge as it changes? Did you know churches, I'm sure you all have gone over this, but let's do it again, have DNAs? And a church, is one of these books I have that's great on transition, talks about a church that was downtown and attendance was really going downtown. People didn't feel safe. So they sold it and moved the property and moved out to the suburbs. We've all heard of that, right? It happened to several churches I saw when I was in Jackson, Mississippi. How does that start a church? That sort of comes back at some point to haunt that church 10, 20, 30, 40 years later, because the church started on a little bit of a fear factor, a little bit of being scared, like we got to get out of here, we got to sell this property, we got to start over fresh. What about the church that starts out in an elementary school cafeteria? There's a lot of them that start out that way. I know my brother's church was like that. And at one point, his youngest son took his Lenten mite box and went up to this young new pastor and took his hand and put the mite box in his hand and goes, here, this will help you build a real church, So that's a certain congregation that's all excited about starting a brand new church. And, she was saying that this started out here being a church where there was military and sort of focused on that. How many Episcopal churches did you all drive by this morning to get here? Zero. So you all live relatively close to the church? Yeah. Any other comments? How far you all drive?
Half an hour, 17 miles.
On Sunday? That's impressive. In theory, people will drive as far as they drive to go to work. What's completely thrown that, though, it's our COVID, because so many more people are working at home now. Is that going to change the way people look at church? Do you think people are still going to make this kind of effort to drive here? Not only on Sunday, but maybe on Wednesday evening, maybe once in a while on Saturday morning. Do you think people will still, after going through all this COVID and getting used to being at home, are we going to keep on coming back? I think we are. I'll tell you why I think that. It's because of conversation. We want to be able to come back and see each other. And looking at each other on a little square just doesn't cut it. And I'll tell you why I really believe that. I saw a couple folks who will remain unnamed that when we started coffee hour back up at my last church I was at, a couple people watched church at home, but they came up to the church for coffee hour. They wanted to see each other that bad. They did the worship thing on Zoom, you know, check that off, that box, but they so badly wanted to see each other. And that was a really, I think, a big aha moment for us. So what might be a way of keeping conversation rolling here at St. Luke's during this time of transition? Mhm. What are small groups right now that are functioning in the church? What are they? I think Yields and, well, the group in the library on Sunday morning is definitely a group. Mhm. Any smaller groups? What goes on during the weeks as far as smaller groups?
Fellowship, but not during the summer.
That's like the time my mom, I swear she said this, but she said she didn't. I was 4 years old and she told me the church was closed for the summer. And later on, she goes, I didn't say that. I said, well, I thought it was strange even at 4 years of age, but no, the church is not closed in the summer anywhere. What I think is so important is we look back in this first phase of the heritage of the church is to be able to have conversation. Because if you all stop talking with each other, the church then loses that asset of you all talking to one another. So for about 5 minutes, I'm going to ask 2 people from each table to move to another table so that we kind of mix up the tables a little bit. 2 people from each table move to a different table. If you have 2 people move out.
Right. Yeah, this is good. That's the one that drives in. Right. Yes.
That's just above. Like church. Right. And this is just.
You all can kind of wrap it up at your table. But thank you all for hello. Hello. Thank you all for wrapping it up. And I want you to think about this book right here. It's called Holy Conversations. And a bishop in Southwest Florida gave that to all his clergy for Easter. That was our Lenten reading assignment. And there was a clergy day and you were told you better have this read by then. So it was interesting because I also found his letter that he sent with it, how it was very kind, but also instructive to do this. But I'd like for y'all to listen to just these two paragraphs from the book. Conversation is holy because at its best, it is about a people's understanding of their identity as a faith community, their sense of purpose, their relationship with God. Though the holy conversation may take a multitude of shapes and dimensions, at its heart, that conversation centers around three critical formation questions. Who are we? What has God called us to do or to be? And who is our neighbor? Change happens through conversation. It is not the plan that will change people and give direction to the congregation. It's the conversation of the people with one another and with God that is a part of the planning process. That changes people. There is no power equal to a community discovering what it truly cares about. So that's where we're kind of at right now, is trying to figure out, St. Luke's is, what is really important and what is really cared about. You know, the Good Samaritan story this morning is about, you would think, my gosh, these other two folks would have stopped and helped this guy. But ultimately, it's the one that everyone just could not stand, the Samaritan. And in France, they have a law now based on that, the Good Samaritan law, that you will stop and render help or assistance if anybody's hurt. So we don't know sometimes who that neighbor is going to be. We can't just necessarily say, okay, it's going to be everybody that lives right over here, or it's going to be those people that live right around us. We don't know that. It may be the person that's hurt that we just helped. I know when my father was very sick the last 2 years, and my mom had a very sick husband at home that time. And she said it always fascinated her who chose to come by and see my father at that time period and visit with him, and who did not ever come. And I think we've all had instances like that. And you think, gosh, well, this person was their best friend and they didn't even come. But sometimes it's those that surprise you most are the ones that you never knew or barely knew, all of a sudden become that closest person in your community or in your conversation. So it opens us up to who is our neighbor. It gives us a whole different, we may not even actually know who that neighbor is until something happens. When we had the electricity out, what was that now, a year and a half ago, and it's freezing cold. I know the little neighborhood where I live, we didn't have any electricity or water for 4 days. And on the 4th day, my neighbor's daughter came over. They had just gotten electricity. And she said, why don't you come with us and bring your dog and you all can come stay at our house. So, these strangers that I had never met before, I know their daughter, but I hadn't met them, invited my dog and I into their house. And we've all become very good friends. And yet a phone call 2 days ago is from my best friend from 6th grade. We're still great friends and she lives out in Phoenix. So neighbors and friends can look very, very different, but we have to expand our horizon as we think of who that might be. So think about who that person, who that family might be in terms of as St. Luke's is moving forward in this transition time. And that's what's really kind of healthy about when we have these opportunities for this transition. It's not one to just sit down and go, okay, 18 months, in 18 months we ought to have this. That's a good hit. That's probably right on its target about when it happens. Obviously you've been through this before. So, but let's use this time well and not just go through the motions of it. You all are on a very good track here. You really are. So you get to kind of start from a solid foundation and take off from there. And but we've got to figure out ways to keep talking to one another and listening because it's important. Today, I was listening to the radio on the way over here. And this guy on the station was kind of rattling away. I pulled over to write this down because I realized I was trying to write it while I was driving. That wasn't working well. No one is rich enough to do without a neighbor. No one is rich enough to do without a neighbor. It doesn't matter what church it is, no one is rich enough to do without a neighbor. So think about that. How are we called to be that neighbor? I've got a friend who told the story about that he was at a conference out in Scottsdale. And they were going out to dinner and there were a bunch of us, one car, and they drove by this beautiful Episcopal church. And he said he kind of thought to himself, wow, I wonder who's the rector of that church. That would really be incredible to be rector of that church. And he was rector of a church in Chicago at the time. Well, guess who's rector of that church 3 years later? His wife was called to the new Mayo Clinic to be one of the attorneys. And so, as he said, the trailing spouse came. And so that put him in Arizona. He became the interim rector and then he became the rector. And he's now a rector at Trinity Church, Wall Street, New York City. So he's obviously, moved on down the road too. But I know my mom said that time that he was with them, she cherished the Thursday morning Bible discussion groups because they all got to talk and visit and such. So let's start looking at ways that we can stay in conversation. As I just read, it's not so much about that we set up all these charts and explain to you. It's about in our talking about those charts and what does that mean? That's important and to be moving forward. Because I'm sure we'll be getting some more information in the next week or so from the National Triennial General Convention. And then that filters down. Presiding bishop's supposed to take care of diocesan bishops, and they're supposed to take care of the clergy, and the clergy are supposed to take care of the parishioners. So Yeah, that's the theory of it, that management system overall. But let's try and figure out ways to keep talking with one another. There may be somebody here that's kind of embarrassing. Sometimes you go, oh, do you go to the other service? And they say, yeah, I've lived here 20 years, you know. And that's in a bigger church like this, that happens. And don't be embarrassed. Just say, you know, well, I'm glad we got to meet now. Any questions or thoughts or comments or ideas I'd like to throw in here with us?
This is only my second time here. I just wanted to share that I think right now is a really great time to invite people to the church.
Great.
Because when I was invited by Michael to come, like I've been inside for 2 years. Yeah, I want to go anywhere you're inviting me to.
Okay.
Yes, I will go to church with you. And I haven't been to church in a really long time.
Thank
So
you.
I'm really happy to be here. And I think now is a really good time to invite your neighbors to come to church with you. Because
Well, thank you for sharing it.
I'm running to meet people.
Thank you, Michael. Would you like to say your name for the
My
group?
name's Gina.
Why don't we just go around? Yeah, I know you won't remember. Why don't everybody just say your name?
I'm Gina.
And Michael,
Carol.
Brian.
And
Austin. Greg.
Jackie. Carol. Sharon. And Chris. Sharon. Maria.
Yeah.
Carol. Amy.
Mike.
Kim.
And Wesley. Brad.
Brad, thank you for being here with us today. Any other comments? Holy Conversations by Gil Rendell and Alice Mann. And it's talks about strategic planning as a spiritual practice, That's why in working with vestries, I've tried to spend maybe almost a third of vestry meetings working on the spiritual growth of the lay leaders of the church. Because we want our lay leaders to be growing spiritually also, and not just have to work about the business of the church too. Any other ideas?
And I guess as we're having these conversations, are there any guiding questions or like where are we trying to get? Like what are some?
Where are we going down the road with this?
nuggets that would make those useful conversations?
What we're going to be doing is there's basically 5 tasks. And the first one that we're in right now is heritage. It's about the heritage of the church. And so pretty soon I'll be bringing out this chart for you all, kind of where we're moving to. I just didn't want to bring it right away. Like at the last church I was at, the rector's office is in a 150-year-old house, farmhouse. And there are 17 or 19 steps curling up this staircase, you know. And you're up there, but no one else is up there. You're kind of up there by yourself. And so I made a chart showing all the steps it would take till the day there are new rectors in place. We did it with the steps. I'm working on something different, you know, for you all here, but we just know we're going to be doing this in steps. We can't necessarily put dates to it. We can't say this will happen by this date, this date, this date. We're just, we can't do that. I know the business world, people can get new leadership in place and such. It just takes us longer in the church, but it's worth it. It really is. Thank you, Austin. Any other thoughts?
I have one. This is referring back to talking about neighbors and conversations. And I know that there are people that will understand this and people that don't, but my favorite educational guy or gal, that happened to be a guy, is Fred Rogers. And he was all about, of course, we know he was all about neighbors. But when you read what that means to him and how he managed to make children his neighbor, you know, worked really well in the classroom. You know, we always talk to each other. I don't mind kids talking. I mind hitting, but I don't mind talking. And so anyway, I think it would be really fun to kind of use Fred sometime, to talk about some of the things, because he really hits home a lot about, not being afraid of your neighbor, just bringing people in that you're just not used to,
Right.
So.
There's two good movies out about that. One is more of a historical, biographical, and then the other one is Tom Hanks plays, Mr. Rogers. So.
Expanding on that, which is a good point. Because we now have several different places that are represented at St. Louis that are not very close to each other. So part of the difficulty is most, if you come to church and you don't see any of your neighbors. So I think one of our goals will actually be, maybe sound a little weird, but actually learning to be each other's neighbor here at St. Louis.
It's a good point. It's a good point. That's why I try and mix you all up at the tables a little bit. You all pretty much sit at the same tables when you're in here, or you're pretty much. I'm getting yes and no's. I followed a rector who had a table in the parish hall, and only he and his wife and the deacon and the organist could sit at. So you know what that did? Everyone else put their stamp on their table. So the first time I went over there for something, all the chairs were turned up, and I said, "No, we're not going to do this anymore, folks. Everybody's going to be able to sit where they want to sit now." And the kids really jumped on board that really quick. It's like, so. Don't mess with your pews. You sound like a senior warden I had once who said, "Doesn't matter what you do at the church, as long as you get it fixed between Sundays." Because we put brand new carpeting and brand new pews all in between 2 Sundays. And the people came the next week and they're like, "Oh, these are nice. This is good." So.
A really moving sermon about exactly what you're talking about. Your pew, your space, and the need to get out and move, and you've got to be sort of part of things. And he actually inspired our younger daughter to use that as a youth talk later.
What a great idea.
So it was so powerful. And it's one of those sermons that just really stuck with me, because you have to make yourself do it, right? It's really natural to sort of gravitate to where you're comfortable, but I think it's, we're really called to kind of push ourselves out a little bit, and no one provides. So
That's a good story, though.
it's so rewarding, I think, when you do it.
Well, my mom, I think I've told some of this, but my mom had first moved to Jackson, Mississippi to St. James, and she sat down and, here she is 98 or 99, but she's in great shape. And every time she would stand for something, she realized this lady next to her was scooting closer and closer and closer, basically shoving her, out of the pew. And so when it got to the passing of the peace, I could kind of see this going on. I'm thinking, oh, Mom's going to chew into her in a minute, or she doesn't quit scooting her down. And so I went down to pass the peace to my mom. And, the look on this lady's face as she scooted back down the pew. Oh, yeah, the dynamics that go on in pews can be, very exciting and such.
Right? And turn them off, and someone might not
Realize what he.
because they feel like, I don't really. So I see something needs to be.
Who can really help with that too are ushers, particularly when someone's a visitor, and just, walk them to a pew next to someone that's outgoing, that will be welcoming and such. And that's one thing where ushers can kind of help that get off to a good start too. So I'm going to let you all go now, but let's go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you. Go get some silly putty.
Thank you.